Jesse Schell is a game designer, CMU professor, author, and CEO of transformational gaming company Schell Games. Jesse is also my colleague and friend. Last spring, I had a great time coaching his CMU students, and this summer, Jesse returned the favor and stopped by our game thinking masterclass to share his wisdom and answer questions. We had a fascinating and wide-ranging conversation. Here's a short excerpt where Jesse reveals how he approaches designing educational games for business.
The key with transformational games, where you've got the goal is I'm going to bring out some kind of change, whether it's a learning change or a habit change or any kind of change, is first you got to understand, well, what is that change that I want to bring about? And you have to be really concrete about that. And then you ask yourself the question, well, why hasn't this change already happened? What's standing in the way of it happening, and what are the barriers that are keeping it from happening? So the challenge was trying to give doctors training about when they should send people to trauma center and when they shouldn't. And in the real world, as we studied this problem, like, why is this a problem? They don't get great training on it to begin with. And then secondly, when they make the call in the hospital about, do we send people to trauma center or do we treat them here? They don't get good feedback afterwards about, did we do this right? Did we do this wrong? They're on to the next case, the next case, the next case. And so they're not getting good feedback. So the first prototype that they tried to create was, they tried to say, well, what if we make a training game so they get a lot of feedback about it? And so they built that. They built a game where you're like, here's case after case after case, and you make the call and it tells you this was right, this was wrong, so they're getting the feedback. But they found out it was not very effective. Following up on the training, it didn't seem to have changed the way people were making their decisions in day-to-day life. And that was a little counterintuitive, because look, we presented the information, we gave them we put them through a loop, they got the feedback, why wasn't it working? And the researcher in charge of this had a theory that it wasn't powerful enough of an experience in order to change their habits. And they thought a lot about the fact that the emotional center of the brain and the memory center of the brain are very much connected. So they came up with a hypothesis that, what if we made a training game that was much more emotional, a much more emotional experience? Maybe that would have a stronger impact. And that was the point they came to our studio and said, look, how can we do this emergency room training, but make it very emotional? So we ended up making an adventure game for them that involved your character having a meaningful relationship with other people in the hospital and with some of the patients. And so that when the patients suffered, it was very emotional. And we got some writers in who were very good at emotional storytelling, so that if something happened, like if you made a bad decision and it ended up proving harmful to the patient, you would be confronted with their family members who were sad and bitter and all of these things. And it was a meaningfully emotional experience. And afterwards, when they studied this game, it turned out this was effective. This did get the training across. And so all that story is just kind of a way of saying, you have to take things case by case. You have to figure out, what is the change I'm trying to make and what is the best way to make it? Because that was not an intuitive idea that bringing more emotion to the table was the way to get better training, but it appears to have been the right decision in that case. And the thing about any kind of training, corporate training, is it's very context sensitive. So often there are social factors involved. I've done a lot of work with training firefighters, for example. And one of the things that we learned early about working with firefighters is that one of the most powerful things for them is their social standing amongst their coworkers. because most of us, social standing with our coworkers is important. With a group of firefighters, this is about who lives and dies. These are people who save each other's lives on a daily basis. Sure, they're going to save other people's lives, but working as a group, if one of them makes a mistake, somebody else dies, and they all know that. And so for them, training as a group is very emotionally fraught. There's a lot in it. They take it very seriously. So if you give firefighters independent training, it's not very meaningful to them. But if you train them as a group, they're all paying intense attention because they all realize that a mistake that someone makes in training could be something that happened in the real world. So they all take it very seriously. So much of it is just about understanding the context in which this training is going to happen. What do people care about? What are the changes I need to make? And what is the experience that's best going to bring about that change? One I think about a lot in gamification, I had somebody approach me once talking about a problem they're having at a warehouse. That they had a lot of turnover in their warehouses. People were always quitting and leaving the job, and because they didn't find the job rewarding enough. And so someone had an idea, well, what if we had a point system where they would get points and there'd be high scores and maybe everything would be more rewarding because of that? And I said, oh, okay, well, let's talk about this turnover problem. Has this always been a problem? And they said, no, not always, but it's been a big problem the last few years. I said, okay, what's different the last few years? They said, well, it used to be different. It used to be you'd come in and there was a manager, and the manager would tell you, you need to do this, you need to do that. When you're done, come back here and see me and I'll give you something else to do. And so it was a very personal thing. But a few years ago, they switched to a system where it's all controlled by a computer. You come in, you put on a headset, the computer tells you where to go, what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, that sounds very kind of impersonal. It sounds like you don't have much control. You don't have any social choice. They're like, that's true, but it's much more efficient because when it was just a person doing it, we didn't always make the best choices. The computer's done all the math about the best choices. I said, okay, all right, well, now I have a better sense of the heart of the problem, right? And so I said, okay, you've got these people wearing headsets all the time. Can they talk to each other? They're like, well, no, we don't support that. I'm like, but you could support that. You could now make this a much more social experience. I guess so. I said, do they have music in their headsets? They're like, no. I'm like, could they? Could they choose what kind of music they're going to have? So there are a lot of ways to solve the problem. Giving points for what you do isn't obviously the best way. And even if it was a good idea, you'd want to do it in a social way anyway, right? You'd want to do it in a way that maybe everyone's working together as a team. And if you could talk to each other and coordinate as a team, maybe that would be better. So it is, these things are always about problem solving and finding the context of what is it that's going to make people focus and pay attention and enjoy what they're doing.
Jesse is one of our Game Thinking VIP coaches, world-class experts who offer advice and feedback to students in our programs. If you enjoyed Jesse's insights into gamification, you're going to love our free training on the #1 mistake that keeps gamification projects from succeeding. We'll show you what it is and what to do instead. If you want to save time and innovate smarter, sign up today at gamethinking.io/webinar. The link is in the description. I look forward to seeing you on the training.